Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we're going to be talking about hopefully answering some questions, some common questions asked by atheists and secularists. We're going through a list now. It's 13 questions altogether. So let us start with the first question. Do Muslims believe in freedom of speech? Freedom of speech is a concept which is an extension of a political philosophy called liberalism, which was originally put in place by, you could argue, the founding father of this ideology is John Locke, or at least one of the main founding fathers. Some say Thomas Hobbes, but the point being is it's a political philosophy, and freedom of expression and speech were some key terms that became especially known to political philosophers, that is, maybe around the 19th century. Maybe before that you could argue with Voltaire, etc., but more specifically I would argue with John Stuart Mill, who wrote on utilitarianism and on liberty, where he powerfully argued for freedom of speech and expression, also argued for freedom of the media and the press, and these concepts which are typically associated with the liberal ideology. As it's known by the Western world, or if you like, the political philosophers, freedom of speech is not the same in Islam as it would be in this philosophy, because it seems, as would be kind of elaborated by John Stuart Mill, that the parameters are defined by the harm principle which he put in place. So the harm principle is you're allowed to do whatever you want so long as you don't harm anyone else. Now this is not the way we would this is not the way a Muslim would organize freedom of speech / expression. It's because of the moral framework being completely different. Now I've done a whole video on this, and I would recommend that you guys go to this and watch this video. It's called, just put my name in liberalism on YouTube and you'll find it for more answers on that. But in a nutshell, the freedom of speech is limited in Islam to the extent whereby it's not contrary to its moral teachings. Number 2, if Allah exists, why doesn't He reveal Himself to us? Well, it depends on how you define reveal. I mean, the word reveal here maybe has an empirical undertone, meaning that He must reveal to ourselves to us in a way which we could see Him, maybe hear Him, or whatever it may be. And this, of course, is a false assumption. The assumption here is that the best way to epistemological truth is through empiricism, and the irony in that is that there is no empirical way of proving such a statement. You know, there is no empirical way of proving that empiricism is the best way to ultimate truth. And if you wanted to argue on that basis, it would be a circular argument and therefore fallacious. But there are different kinds of truths. There are metaphysical truths, there are deductive truths, there are logical truths, there are mathematical truths, and all of that which I've just mentioned have nothing to do with empiricism. And of course, this is not a new claim. This was a claim that was a new question, if you like. This was an old question that, for example, the Bani Israel asked Moses for back in the days, when he said, "Arina Allah jahra," let us see Allah plainly and clearly. And so this is a kind of false belief system which shows a lack of epistemological consistency on behalf of the questioner. Number 3, if Allah is perfectly good, then why is there evil in the world? Well, if an atheist is asking that question, the first question I'll ask back at them is, how do you define an object of evilness in the first place? Because frankly, according to your worldview, and according to the majority of philosophers that espouse, let's say, an atheist postmodernism, like Bertrand Russell and Nietzsche and Derrida and others, there is no such thing as an objective or moral evilness. So that question should not be asked by an atheist that believes in such things. Now, if you do believe in some kind of Kantian, for example, mechanism that could grant you, or me, or anyone else, an ultimate truth through any other means without religion, then I would ask you, how do you prove that the mechanism of proving such a truth is itself a reliable mechanism? So in other words, you're always going to be in the darkness of subjectivity when it comes to evilness as an objective thing, as long as you are a materialist and or an atheist that doesn't believe a higher entity with all knowledge. That's point 1. Point 2 is, analogize this for you in an interesting story which I think is found in some Eastern traditions, with three blind men that went to the zoo. So three blind men went to the zoo. One of them held the trunk of the elephant, the other one held the tail of the elephant, and the third one held the ear of the elephant. All three of them came back and were asked a question. They were asked the question, what is the elephant like? And all three of those blind men gave different answers. Now the reason why they gave different answers is because they only felt or experienced a part of the elephant. They did not experience all of the elephant, and for that reason they had differentiated conclusions. In the same way, when we talk about evilness and badness, if you like, yeah, and people seeing things in the world that are going wrong and saying, why is this happening? They are just seeing a part of the whole. And had they believed in the metaphysical reality of the Day of Judgment and or that which comes after the Day of Judgment, they would certainly not ask that question. But if they don't believe in such forums in the first place, such domains in the first place, then the question is has a materialistic presupposition. What is that presupposition? That all that we see is that all we will see, which is actually a fallacious type presupposition, because it's the argument from ignorance. Anyways, I don't want to go into too much detail about this, but the point is, this is a fallacious type questioning based on presuppositions which are unfounded, speculative, or otherwise not substantiated in any philosophical, objective way whatsoever. Moving on to the next question. If Allah is perfectly good, then if Allah controls destiny, then how can I be accountable for my actions? This is the question of free will versus determinism, and I will give you another analogy to try and put this in an easy way. This is taken from Firas al-Dhahabi. He made me think about this. It's actually a very good analogy, and I thought about it over and over again. I think it's a very interesting way of putting this together. Imagine someone's jumping into a swimming pool. Yeah, just imagine with me, this person here is jumping into the swimming pool. Someone is jumping into the swimming pool. And I say to you that the force that is required for that person to go into the swimming pool is a force of 2.0. Yes? I'm not a physicist, but I'm just giving you some abstract terms so you can relate with this analogy, right? Say for example, the force that is required for that person to jump into the swimming pool is 2.0. If I ask one question, if the person wants to jump in the swimming pool and he jumps with a force of 2.0, will that person go into the swimming pool? Yes. If I push the person with a force of 2.0, will the person fall into the swimming pool? Yes, because the force that is required for that person to go into the swimming pool is 2.0. What if both things happen at the same time? In other words, what if his will is connected with my will, and there is a synchronization between the two wills, such that the person jumps in the swimming pool at the same time as I'm pushing him in the swimming pool? Wait a minute. Say this again. Okay, no problem. I'll say it one more time. Say the person jumps in the swimming pool at the same time as I'm pushing him. So literally there are two kinds of forces. There's his own force, and there's the force of, say for example, person X is pushing him into the swimming pool. The person will fall into the swimming pool. So this is in one way. ومن عجائب الجبار أن يجبر العباد بالاختيار. It is from, this is a line of poetry from one of the scholars. It says, it is from the wondrous nature of the Jabbar, the compeller, that he compels the compelled into free will. So you're compelled to making a decision to jumping into the swimming pool, but at the same time anyways, I'm going to push you in anyways. The point being is, there is no contradiction here. There's only a contradiction if you can prove that it's impossible for the two wills to connect. That's the only way you can prove that free will contradicts predestination. If you can say, look, actually there's no way in which me jumping in the swimming pool and being pushed in can happen. If you say that and you can prove that, then you have a case. But otherwise you don't have a logical case. You just have something which you've never experienced before. You've never experienced two things which are seemingly paradoxical coming together in this way. Next question. Do Muslims believe in evolution? Evolution, we have to ask the question, because a lot of people, when they study science in a vacuum, in a scientific vacuum that is, I've had lots of conversations with scientists, and they see the world in a materialist way. In other words, all they see with the scientific method is the evidence in front of them. But the truth is, what needs to be understood as well is something called the philosophy of science. And you can pick up a small book. It's called The Introduction to the Philosophy of Science, written by Samir Al-Kasha, which actually is a Cambridge University Press book, and it's part of the series of introduction books. It's a very good starting point for those who want to understand the philosophy of science. That's the first recommendation. Another thing you can read is Thomas Kuhn's book, Structures of Scientific Revolution. It's a big book, but it will give you an understanding of how it is the case that something which is scientific at one point and seen as a scientific fact can completely change in another time and place. A good example of this is Newtonian physics. Newtonian physics was seen as normatively factual up until Einsteinian physics, up until the special theory of relativity in the early 20th century. So this paradigm shift, if you like, from Newtonian, as Thomas Kuhn would argue, from Newtonian to Einsteinian physics, is indicative of the fact that the whole framework within which science works can sometimes take a serious paradigm shift. The question is this: what evolution are we talking about? You know, 1859, Charles Darwin wrote a book called The Origin of Species. His book is completely differentiated in terms of its presuppositions from for example, evolutionary stances, Darwinian evolutionary stances, which rely more heavily on, for example, genetics, RNA, DNA, etc. The framework has already changed within the evolutionary framework. But one of the things that has to be understood is that one of the points of evidence for an evolutionist will always be the archaeological record. And the archaeological record, by its nature, cannot be generalized. I mean, how many fossils do we actually have? That is a question we have to really understand the answer of. We cannot, and this is the problem of induction that's referred to by David Hume. How many fossils do we have and are generalizing from? And how many do we need in order to generalize fully? These are two very important questions. Yeah. So in terms of specifically what contradicts Islam is human evolution. That is contradictory to Islam because of the many hadiths, which we don't have time to cover here, and the Quranic verses which refer to a instantaneous creation of Adam, that Allah created Adam directly. And why would Allah, this is another question which relates to the hikmah of Allah, why would He create the human being directly in this way? Well, because human being is completely differentiated from the rest of the species. And you can divide these differentiations into 5 main points, distinguishable points. Number 1, morality. Number 2, language. Number 3, the ability to question why. I mean, you don't find zebras and lions asking, why am I here, for example. Number 4, civilization. You don't find animals having civilization and these things. And number 5, you could say, is, we said language, we said the ability to question why, civilization. These are 3 points. Let's keep it at 3 actually. Let's keep it at 3 for now, which you'll not find in other species. Now, the point is this. If you wanted to put a number 5, you could say intelligence. You can say the ability for that human being to rule over the known world, even the species which are much stronger. The rationality of human being is differentiated completely from the rationality of any other sentient being. So, or any other animal species. So, from that perspective, the Islamic narrative is quite clear that because human being is special, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ وَحَمَلْنَاهُ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ, that we have certainly dignified human being, that his creation was a special type of creation. But there are some interesting overlaps between the theory of Darwinian evolution and the Quranic narrative. One of them seems to be the fact that the human being is quite a modern creature respective to other creatures that have been supposedly evolved, because Allah seems to indicate that He created everything for the human being and then He created the human being afterwards. He also seems to indicate that human being was from inanimate material, which by the way is a problem for evolutionists, because the concept of abiogenesis, or something coming about, basically chemistry becoming biology, chemistry becoming biology, is a speculative concept. People don't have a firm answer as to how exactly did inanimate things become animate. There are so many different competing theories of how or even if that did happen. But Allah makes it clear, and there is an argument from the Quran. كيف تكفرون بالله وكنتم أمواتا ثم فأحياكم ثم يميتكم ثم يحييكم ثم إليه ترجعون. That how can you disbelieve in Allah and you are dead and then He raised you to life and then He put you to death again, etc. The point being is that in order to give life, you have to have life. Inanimate chemistry, inanimate things, which are compounds or chemistry compounds, whatever you want to call them, right, cannot give life because they don't even have life. And when Allah was speaking to John in the Quran, He says, وَقَدْ خَلَقْتُكَ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَلَمْ تَكُ شَيْئًا. I created you before and you did not even exist before. So in order for an evolutionist to have an argument against Quran, Islam, they have to explain to us how it is that inanimate things became animate, how it is that chemistry became biology, without the intervention of something which possessed life to then give that life. So there are lots of issues. But what we will say is that there is evidence for the Darwinian evolution, just as there may be evidence for Neo-Lamarckian evolution, just as there may be evidence for any kind of other evolution. Look, Darwinian evolution does not have the monopoly on evolution. That's a problem, understanding as well. So we've done lots of videos on this. In fact, I've done one with Sabur Ahmad. You can watch this on my channel, and his channel is called I forget his name, Darwinian Delusions. It's called Darwinian Delusions. Check that on YouTube and you will find incredible examples of problems with evolution as understood today, especially in the light of the philosophy of science. If there are so many religions in the world, how do you know your Islam is correct? There are so many religions in the world. By just looking at the basic theology of the 6 major world religions, you'll find that none of them are coherent except for Islam. For example, look at the Trinity. It's a contradictory understanding of God. That Jesus is 100% man, 100% God. That the Father is divine, omnipotent, almighty. That the Son is divine, omnipotent, almighty, and that the Holy Spirit is divine, omnipotent, almighty. But there are not 3 almighties, but 1 almighty. I mean, this is a problem and a contradiction, in fact. Clear contradiction. Look at the atheistic worldview. That something, the assumption here is that something came from nothing. Or maybe there was a multiverse that we can't substantiate. All these things are weak understandings of theology. And we can go into details about that. You can look at our debates with other religious groups online. But in a nutshell, the main argument is that the theology is most intelligible, most coherent, and most sound. And most intuitive as well. That it's something which is predisposed in a human being. If Allah supports the believers, why do prophets and righteous suffer so much? Well, there's a hadith on this, in fact. That the people who are ashad the bala are the prophets, which means that the ones who are tested the most are the prophets. Then those who are like them the most, and then those who are like them the most. Because the more you struggle and you're tested in this world, the more, yes, you deserve. Because the more you work, the more you deserve the fruits of your labor. And that's actually a sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning one of the natural laws. And we know this from everyday living. The harder you work, the more you'll get. Usually, that is the general principle. And it's also a misconception to think that tests are only painful things. The Quran says, وَلَقَدْ بَلَوْنَاهُمْ بِالْحَسَنَاتِ وَالسَّيِّئَاتِ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجَعُونَ. That we have certainly tested them with good things and bad things so that they may come back. So you can be tested with wealth, with children, with fame. It doesn't mean a test has to necessarily be, yes, something which is painful or afflicting, if you like. If Allah supports the believers, why did Allah choose a man who couldn't read or write to teach the people about religion? The Quran tells us the answer to this question in Surah Al-Ankabut, chapter 29 of the Quran, which it tells us that, so that they don't say that he wrote it with his own hands. Because it's interesting to think that usually illiteracy is a negative thing to think about someone, but in the context of Prophet Muhammad is a positive thing. Why? Because if he had not been illiterate, he would be accused of writing the Quran or authoring it himself. So for him, it's a sharaf, it's a dignity, it's something which amplifies the proof for him. Yes, and acts as a proof for him that he could not have authored this book. If Allah is all loving, then why would He create the hellfire? Because Allah is not just all loving, but He is also all just. And the hellfire is something which represents His ultimate doing of justice. Had it not been created, then justice would not be done. And if you don't think that it's merciful for a God to put people in such a place, then you don't know, you have a low understanding of what it means to sin against such a God. Simple thing. And in this case, to completely go against His will. If Allah is the perfect creator, then why do we see so many imperfections in creation? What do you mean by imperfections? Because if we're talking about the inanimate creation, the celestial bodies, the rotations of the planets, the expansions of the universe, or anything like that, we would argue to the contrary. You say, look, the universe, as have argued many, even Stephen Hawkins, in his brief history of time, is fine-tuned for human existence. So what do you mean imperfect? And what is your definition of perfection? Is it aesthetic value judgment that you're employing? Or what are you employing exactly? Once again, are you going back to this idea that your judgment or your opinion of what evilness is the opinion? That again is philosophically unsound as an opinion to have. If Allah is all-knowing, then why does He need angels to write down people's deeds? He does not need angels to write down people's deeds. But He puts them in charge of doing that so it can be a record against them. The question is wrong. The question suggests that Allah needs anything, where the Quran does not say this. This is something that you're saying, whoever the questioner is. So it's a false question.
Yeah. So the question here, the next question is, why does Allah need? Why do Muslims pray for help if Allah already knows what's in their hearts? It's a form of worship. Allah says in the Quran, فَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ. I ask if my slave asks me about me, then tell him I am near. I answer the call of the caller when he calls. And the hadith says, "Ad-du'a ibadah." That du'a is worship. So it is a worship that we do to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it only benefits us. Yes, if you even have just the thoughts of something in your heart, Allah may relieve you. It doesn't mean that you have to do this, but it's a highly recommended thing, especially in the prayer, because when you're praying 17 times a day and you're saying ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, guide us to the straight path, which we do, it's a kind of dua anyways. So this is an obligatory kind of dua that we have to make, and it's a kind of worship that we do that helps us. I've challenged Allah personally to show me a sign, but nothing. I have not seen anything. Well, who are you to challenge Allah? Who are you to challenge Allah? If you've challenged Allah, yeah? So you are a self-entitled, narcissistic individual who thinks the whole world revolves around them and that everything must be given to them on a silver plate or even on a golden one, and that you should be given the signs. And as you're walking, maybe you should have the red carpet there to cover every step of your way. This shows a narcissism that is probably a byproduct of the individualistic culture that you have been absorbed into, which once again links into ontological liberalism and these things. You need to be more humble. It's not about you challenging Allah. It's about you challenging yourself, and challenging yourself to come to the truth, and asking yourself what the truth is, and begging Allah to help you. And it might not be today, and it might not be tomorrow, but one day you have to have as much faith in Allah as you have in your own confidence, by the sounds of your questioning. And I will tell you something. There's a hadith that says, "Ana 'inda dhanna 'abdi bi." I am at the thoughts of my slave. So if he thinks good about me, I will give him good, and if he thinks bad about me, I will give him bad. So maybe the reason why you're not getting what you want is because you have bad thoughts about the Creator. Guys, it's been a pleasure answering your questions. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.